Synchronise the video with the sound. Well, welcome to our discussion today. And Mary, you won't see much of today aside from being behind the camera. Mary, my partner. So, who of you has actually never seen any presentation I've ever given either on YouTube or anything else? So, this is the first time you've ever come to anything. So, two of you. And my suggestion is that some of what we cover today you'll probably need a bit of background with. So it would be good if you have a look on YouTube or something like that. You'll be able to see some other presentations. And I can, if you like, make some suggestions to you during our breaks as to what is a good thing to look at if you want to know more information. Who of you have seen the presentations before? A number of them, or at least one of them? Yeah, so most of you. Some of you I've never met before, so I'm pleased to meet you. And my name's Jesus. Of course, my name this life is Alan John Miller. You might have heard me called AJ quite frequently as well. And I'm happy to be called pretty much anything you want. I know, so I don't need you to worry about that. And Mary and myself spend a lot of time travelling around talking about what we call divine truth to people. And in the process of discussing divine truth, there are so many different aspects to truth that we want to discuss with people. And what we're hoping to do today is discuss with you some of those different aspects of divine truth. And when we go to a location, we can generally feel the underlying what you would call spiritual condition, if you like, of the audience and the general underlying issues and problems that different people in the audience face. And so what we would like this to be is a relatively dynamic discussion where you can ask questions and if you need answers to different questions. But we would like you to be relatively on target with regard to the subject matter, if that's whatever the subject matter happens to turn out being. I was thinking initially that what I would like to do is just present to you a bit of an overview of the basic principles of divine truth that we've been reminding people of when we go travelling. The main reason why I'd like to present this overview is because I feel many people get away from the basics of spiritual development. And the basics of spiritual development are very different, I feel, to what the majority of religions and the majority of New Age teachings actually portray. The basics of spiritual development are, in my feelings, are three primary things that we need to do and develop. So what I'd like to do today is discuss with you what I would call the basics of spiritual development, and then what I would like to do is discuss with you what I would call pseudo-spirituality. Spirituality where we think we're being spiritual, but actually there's a lot of other things going on with regard to what's happening. And also discuss with you how pseudo-spirituality can be identified and recognised in comparison to true spirituality, or what I would call in comparison to God's truth, or the truth of the universe. Now I've got a few whiteboard markers which I have to unleash from their there. And there are three basic principles, and please feel free to ask questions at any time during this discussion. There are three basic principles that I would like to discuss with you initially, just briefly. The first one is this quality of humility. Humility, if I can define it, is the desire, what I would call the passionate desire, to feel and experience every single emotion that is within you without projecting or damaging other people with the emotion that you're actually experiencing. The passionate desire to see yourself as you truly are. Does that sound clear as to what humility is? In other words, we don't want to falsify who we are, neither to ourselves or to another, or, and this is impossible, but often many people attempt to do it, we often try to falsify ourselves to God as well. And unfortunately, many of us don't yet realise that God sees everything and he sees exactly what we are. But if we are humble, we are able to come to see ourselves as God sees us, warts and all. So all of the flaws and everything else, we're truly open to feeling and seeing. Now, humility is a primary requirement if you wish to connect to God. Without humility, there can be no further development. So this quality of humility is one of the most important personal qualities that you can develop yourself. And with humility, you don't really need to develop it with anybody else or through anybody else. It's a quality that is completely able to be developed from your own heart and soul and through your own effort. Humility is one of those qualities that is it's very much determined by your own desire. Your desire to be real, a real person, not a fake person or a facade. You know the song Eleanor Rigby, the Beatles? Many of you know that? You remember in Eleanor Rigby, one of the lines is, she stares out the window wearing the face that she keeps in a jar by the door. Right? What does that mean? Well, it's quite obvious, isn't it? That most of us, when we leave home, in particular, we go out into the world and we become a different person. Now, that's not humility. That is only done to impress others or to conform to society or conform to others' desires or so forth. When we're humble, we don't do that. We are the same person home, privately, by ourselves, as we are in front of 1,000 people. Exactly the same person when we're humble. And we don't try to embellish ourselves when we're humble. We don't try to make ourselves look good under certain circumstances. Does that make sense? That's what true humility is. Now, when we have that kind of humility, the beauty of having that kind of humility is that it opens us to the next thing that we need to connect to God. And the next thing we need to connect to God is to be able to accept truth. So you could think of humility as a doorway to truth. Does that make sense? It opens us, when we're humble, it opens us to receiving new belief systems and new truth into our soul. It opens us in ways that we're incapable of opening using any other technique or any other so-called spiritual development. So the importance of humility is that it's a personal quality that we ourselves can develop to open ourselves to be able to listen to and experience more truth. So let's define truth. Truth is God's truth. In other words, the truth as God perceives the universe, but also the truth as God perceives you. So can you see there's two aspects of it? There's what I would classify as the universal aspect of it. And we're talking about external truths here, truths that are external to ourselves. Right? And then there are the truths that are personal, or internal to ourselves. The truth about ourselves. Now, if we're humble, we will be open to both types of truth. But what I find quite frequently is that many of us are totally fascinated with the investigation of universal or external truth, while at the same time, many of us are totally blocked to seeing anything about ourselves. Right? And actually coming to change inside of ourselves. Now, if we have true humility, we will actually be open to truth that is both external or universal, and also truth that is about ourselves, our personal, what's going on inside of us, really going on inside of us. Not what we would like to keep in the jar by, the face that we keep in the jar by the door, but rather the face that we really are, the person we really have become. And once we can face ourselves, the truth about ourselves, we have the ability to change ourselves. But if you never face the truth about yourself, it's impossible to change yourself. That makes sense, doesn't it? It's a bit like a lady who stands in front of a mirror deciding to put some makeup on and not being able to see the reflection coming from the mirror. Right? If we can't see the reflection coming from the mirror, like it's in a dark room, and she starts putting on the makeup, there could be quite a bit of makeup placed in areas that are going to make her look quite worse than she actually appears. If you can see the reflection you're beginning with, then at least when you make changes, you have the ability to make changes in the right areas. But if you can't see yourself truthfully when you begin, then it's impossible to actually make changes in areas that are going to cause you to grow. So it is very, very important that personal truth is engaged. It's also important that universal truth is engaged, because it's no good trying to think something is true when, from God's perspective, it's totally different to what you believe. Right? So, for example, if I can give one example, if I believe that God is a punishing God and he will destroy the wicked at the time of Armageddon, which is a very biblical way of looking at the future, if I believe that and yet God's not going to do that, then I'll be waiting for that event for the rest of my life and nothing will happen. And that's pointless, isn't it? To wait for something that will never happen. You want to know the truth and prepare for the events that are going to happen, events that are truthful. So for that reason, it's very important too to understand the universal external truth. But for the majority of people, they love that. They love the investigation and discovery of universal external truth. They enjoy the process of listening to people, investigating new thought, new ideas and everything else. But as soon as that person tells them something about themselves that they don't want to hear, what do? Just wipe that off. It's immediately dismissed, generally. And this is where, if we're not open to personal or internal truth, we can actually stop completely our own progression spiritually. We can stop all spiritual progression by not being open to this internal truth. So for those who have just arrived, basically I have discussed so far humility, which is this passionate desire to feel everything that's going on inside of yourself and present yourself truthfully to the world in all circumstances and situations. There are no hidden agendas inside of you or hidden aspects of you in what you present to others. When you're humble like that, you are totally open to receiving truth. And when you're totally open to receiving truth, you can actually receive external truth and internal truth. In other words, you can receive truth about the universe and how the universe is created, how it functions, how all the laws work of the universe and so forth. But you're also capable, emotionally capable, of receiving the internal truth without having resistance to it, without getting angry and upset and disappointed with internal truth. In other words, you're capable of receiving truth from others about yourselves, about your personality, your nature, your characteristics, whether they are so-called good or pleasant to be around, or bad or unpleasant to be around. You're still as open to receiving the truth about that. Now, if we have this humble state and we're open to the truth in that manner, now we're capable of receiving something unique, and that is God's love. The reception of God's love. Now, I'm not stating here that God doesn't love you if you don't do those things. What I'm saying is you will not feel God's love enter you unless you do these things. There's a big difference between those two states. You see, the reality is that God loves all of us all the time with an unending, passionate love. The problem we have is that the majority of us do not feel it every single minute or hour of the day. Right? And if we did, we would become what I call it one with God. In other words, unable to actually live away from all of God's laws and principles. We have an understanding of the universe automatically in that place. The complete universe, all of the laws. We have a detailed understanding of everything going on in the universe around us and also going on inside of ourselves. Now, to get to that point, we have to receive divine love. Now, God's love is there, ready to be given to us. The problem is, it's impossible to receive unless we're totally humble and totally open to truth. Does that make sense to everyone? Has everyone got any questions at this point? Because there's something more I'd like to say about how that looks in terms of our soul and how it enters our soul. Is something back there?
Yes. Can you just please describe for you how you're referring to humility?
It's as I said earlier, and I think you missed out on that because you just entered, but it's the passionate desire to feel and experience everything, every single emotion and belief that you have inside of yourself without damaging any other person surrounding you. So in other words, if I can give an example, let's say I say something to you that makes you upset or angry. If you are humble, you would allow yourself to feel your anger in that moment without pushing it out onto anybody else, including the person who triggered that anger or caused what you believe caused it. You would feel the emotions inside of you that the anger covers, which are fear, generally. And underneath the fear, you would then feel some grief, most probably. And all of that would happen instantly, right? Inside of you, if you were completely humble. So you would totally and have a passionate desire to be totally open like that emotionally. And you don't hold it back because you're now in the shopping centre or down in the schoolyard or working at work. None of the emotions that you feel are held back in any situation whatsoever. Does that make sense? But they are completely owned by yourself, and never do you want another person to share them or be involved in them or feel the results of them. That's humility. There's very few people on the planet that are actually humble as a result of that definition. Yeah. Because when you think about it, for the majority of us, we hear a bit of external truth come at us and we instantly get our back up, right? And then there's this tendency for us to go, I don't like that person anymore. I'll ban them from my life. I'll, stay away from them. See, rather than feel our own emotions and feel what the cause is within us that we feel this way, we want to change our environment so we don't get that from somewhere else. So the majority of us, instead of being humble, we do what I often call managing our law of attraction. Does that make sense? In other words, we've attracted events coming to us through different day-to-day experiences, and what we try to do is we try to circumvent our emotions with those events. So we manage our life so that we don't have to feel any what we call bad or unhappy or fear-based emotions. We manage our life. So if a person grates on our nerves, what do we do with them? We put a little border around them. They're a person we're not going to see anymore. Right? We don't need, and we justify it by going, and this is pseudo-spirituality, I don't need them in my life. And that is a pseudo-spirituality statement, to be frank. Because the reality is, the soul, your own soul, has attracted them into your life. So you must need them in your life to actually cure something that's out of harmony with love inside of you. Right? But instead of going like, I need them in my life, they grate in this little area of me, I need them in my life to find out what it is that they're grating inside of me. What it is that causes me to feel unloving towards them. And once I've worked through that, then Oftentimes those kind of people leave your life, or they change. Something else happens that causes them to change. But for the majority of us, what we do is we manage that by going, I don't need them in my life. I'll just not see them anymore. And then when they ring you up on the phone, you go, oh, it's her again. You pick up the phone and you don't say, I don't need you in my life anymore, because you've got the face that you're keeping in the jar by the door on, right? So that's how you feel, but you don't say it because it's not polite to say that. So what we do instead is we say to them, oh yes, oh yes, oh yes, I've got to go now. Right? And we've gotten again away from the fact that we've just attracted this person who grates on our nerves into our life again through that phone conversation. And there must be something going on that would cause us to attract that particular individual that is actually out of harmony with love inside of ourselves. Yes?
At what point would you say, I actually sit with this particular thing, that somebody's grating on me, and I'm torn between wanting to share that and own it and say, this is mine, or sitting with it and processing it, by which time it's usually passed and we've moved on to something else. So I don't know what's best for my spiritual path.
Later on, I'm going to talk a bit about sort of the emotions and how to go about processing of the emotions and so forth. But when you talk about sharing yourself with another person, my feelings are that if you are completely humble and you don't have a different face for the door that you take outside, but rather you have the same face, in other words, you are the same person when you're home alone as to when you're outside or doing things with other people. If you are like that, what happens is you are automatically giving yourself to the world without having to share anything, like specifically take a time to share. Because you are automatically sharing yourself with the world, your true self. Now, the reason why most of us have a feeling of, oh, I'd like to share something with you, the statement of I'd like to share something with you, is because most of the time we're not sharing ourselves with somebody else, and we have to create a unique and special time to do it so that everyone's ready for what's going to come out at that particular point in time, right? That's what we do. And this is the problem we face. See, if we were real all the time, then there'd be no need for us to actually make the statement, oh, I'm going to share this with you. We're automatically sharing something with somebody else. So what Mike and Fee have learned when they stay with me, when I stay with them, that I'm sharing myself all the time. Now, sometimes a lot of what I'm sharing is not always liked by the person who's with me, but I am giving myself completely as I feel and as I think even. So for the majority of us, we have thoughts that are very, very different to what we tell another person. So, you come up, shake a person's hand. Some of you have a thought, oh, he's pretty tall. I wonder what he would be like to have to, go to bed with. Now, most of us would be a bit embarrassed to share that with the person. So we go, hello, how are you? What was your name? While this other play is going on inside of ourselves, right? Now what are we doing? We're separating our true self, our true nature, with what is for what we would call public consumption. So we're separating, we're privatising our true self. I suppose that's how they came up with the privatising of government departments and so forth. It's a privatisation of our true self. We do it all the time. What we do is we make ourselves private, and we only share that private person with a few individuals, if any at all, in fact. And in fact, what we finish up doing is barely sharing the private person with even our own partner if we're in a relationship. There are often things that our own partner does not even know about ourselves because we're not humble enough to share ourselves come what may, whatever the results are. So we go, I was just attracted to that lady walking down the street. I can't tell my wife, she's going to be upset. Can you see? And what have we just done? We've just put on the mask to our wife, and now we're expecting to be close still with our wife, but now there's a barrier, is there not? the barrier is that they're not seeing us as we truly are anymore. They are seeing an image of us, something that we wish to create. Yeah. Is there any more chairs, guys? There's a few. There's one here. A few chairs. Oh, there's a few chairs down this side if you'd like to. Yeah. Yes.
Is it appropriate then to share with the person you've just shaken their hand with that you'd actually like to take this further?
I'll raise that whenever everyone's calm down here. That's a good question. Just wait for everything to quiet down because the mics pick up everything you say. The question just asked was, is it appropriate to share everything when, like, what you might share might be pretty confronting to the individuals who are hearing what you're sharing? My feelings are that when you are in a completely humble state, you will automatically share everything with everyone. And you will not edit yourself on any occasion with any individual. Now, there are certain situations where it's not possible to share everything you think with somebody because, for example, you might be walking down the aisle picking up things in a supermarket, somebody comes past in the other direction who you know. Now, you're shopping, and so, of course, your primary activity is the shopping, and you can't really get in a conversation of, yeah, you look pretty bad today, and, like all that kind of conversation in the shopping centre, so you may actually have those feelings, but because you're actually doing something else which is your primary activity, you may not share it in that particular place. But you will not purposefully edit yourself in order to present a facade to another. Now, the majority of us do this. The majority of us do purposefully edit ourselves in order to present a facade to another. And we do that through all sorts of means in our day-to-day life. In fact, if you think about your average day, in your day-to-day life, if you even think about Friday. So what did most of you do Friday? Yesterday. Is it yesterday? Yes. Friday. I'm still trying to catch up. What did you do yesterday? Work? How many of you worked yesterday? You have a job and worked? How many of you did something different yesterday? Home? How many of you were home yesterday? How many of you live with a partner home? Yeah. How many of you are by yourselves when you're home? Okay. So, quite a few. Okay, so let's say for those of you who are home, what did you do? Is it too hard to even share that? It's like, oh no.
I was sorting out my tax, which was very boring.
Sorting out tax, very boring. Okay. I'll skip that bit about the morning masturbation and I'll go. That's what we do, isn't it? Automatically. You see, what we're doing is we are constantly editing ourselves, presenting something in terms of what is allowable socially, what we feel is socially acceptable. The problem with socially acceptable is that it creates a facade that everybody is okay with. Now, the problem with that is that you can't be yourself with that facade. All of us are uniquely individual, are we not? We have unique personalities. Like, hopefully, you've never met another person like me. And I've never met another person like you. Right? Now, we sometimes meet people that are similar and who seem to have similar sort of issues or problems. But in terms of the underlying personality and nature and attributes of a person, every single person is unique. Now, if we all conform to what's socially acceptable, now we are removing our uniqueness, are we not? Now, in the process of removing our uniqueness, we are now also no longer humble because we have to, what we're choosing to do, instead of accepting all truth, which remember was both the universal and internal truths, now what we're doing is we're accepting a universal facade, what is defined as socially acceptable. Now, in that place, there are going to be belief systems that I'm going to reject that would have been true that I could accept, but I reject it because it's not socially acceptable. How many of you found it difficult to tell your family and friends today that you were coming along to hear this guy who thinks he's Jesus speak? Right? Why wouldn't you say anything? Because it's not socially acceptable. People automatically go, what? What's wrong with you? Of course he's not Jesus. Why would you come and listen to him speak? So you know, they automatically have a judgment, and it's our underlying fear of judgment that causes us to get out of humility and cause us to not feel everything, not passionately feel everything, including what it feels like to be judged. Right? So instead of doing that, what we do is we don't accept that. We're saying basically to the world around us, I don't want you to judge me, and I'm going to modify my behaviour for you so that you don't judge me. But for the other person who doesn't judge me, I'm going to be a bit more open and because I know they'll accept me. Now that now is allowing us, in one situation we are no longer ourselves. Is that not true? And in that situation we're no longer ourselves, what I'm saying to you is in that situation where you are no longer yourselves, you are now not in a state of personal truth. And because you're now not in a state of personal truth, you now cannot receive God's love in that moment. To receive God's love, you must always be in a state of personal truth, as well as universal truth. Right? Now, for the majority of us, God's love is still present there, ready to enter us, but we just can't receive it because we're being fake. We're being fake with people around us or with God or with ourselves. And as a result of being fake, having on the facade, we are putting a block up to what God created us to be. God created us as unique, personalitied individuals. Unique attributes and qualities and characteristics inside of each of us. And He created us to become that person all the time. Now, if I'm modifying that, if I'm changing that and manipulating that, then I am automatically disconnecting myself from what God intended me to be, and therefore I'm automatically disconnecting myself from God Himself or herself. I'm automatically breaking what I could have a permanent connection with God, but I'm automatically breaking it. Now, the majority of us live that every single day of our lives. We go through these cycles where sometimes we're in personal truth, sometimes not, and the times we're not receiving God's love. In fact, we're barely receiving love from anybody because we're having to barter for love in that moment. Can you see? Every moment that I am not myself with you, I am now having to barter with you. I'm presenting something that's not me to you in order to get something from you. It might be just your approval or no judgment from you or something like that. But I am trying to be something I am not. When I'm trying to be something I'm not, I am now setting up this arrangement that even if you love me, you're not loving the real me. You're loving a facade of myself. So if I am not my real self with you, and you are not your real self with others, any love you receive in that place is actually received by the facade and not by the real you. That's why it doesn't feel as good. Love only generally feels good when it's received by the true self, the person you truly are. The same applies with God's love, and this is something that I'd like to discuss further with you about God's love.
How do you know if you're presenting your facades all the time? How do you know when you're being your true self?
And we'll talk about we'll talk more about true spirituality, or what I'd call true soul development, which is all about releasing the facade, and also what I'd call pseudo spirituality or pseudo development, which is all about maintaining facades. And And if we can look at the qualities of each of those types of spirituality as we go on, then we'll be able to determine whether we do one or the other frequently. The key is to be quite self-reflective. So when we're humble, we feel our own emotions in a specific location and situation. We always feel our own emotions. So for example, if you had to get up here now for 5 minutes, what would you feel? Would they come up and just... Can you see even your terror now just goes, no, I'm not going up there. Right? So you'd feel terrified. So is terror a love-based emotion, do you feel, or a fear-based emotion? Fear-based. Whenever I'm in a fear-based emotion, so your self at the moment, your real self, is actually quite afraid of having to present herself publicly. Is that not true? Right. So I would go, right, that situation now where AJ invited me to the front and I immediately felt this panic feeling, that tells me that there's a place that's out of harmony with love of myself here. Because if I loved myself truly, I wouldn't in a facade get up and come to the front, but I'd be comfortable to come to the front. Does that make sense? I wouldn't have any feeling of discomfort in that process. If I loved myself and I was truly humble, I'd be totally able to come to the front, even if I'm afraid, even. That would be also the case. So that's telling me straight away that something's up. That's telling me that even while you're sitting right there, there's a facade in place. And the facade is, I'm happy to sit in the corner up the back, minding my own business with an occasional question. But if you now put me in the spotlight, where I'm asked to do something or perform or do something, now I am a completely different person. I feel completely different. And so that's telling me that one or both of those places, the quiet back person sitting down, occasionally asking a question, or the person who's up front, is in a facade. And the key is to be self-reflective and to go, okay, which one is the real me? And the truth is that both can be, but there's different fears involved in each. Right? And the key is to allow ourselves to feel the emotion rather than to intellectually analyse what it's about. So when I made the statement, come up, you were wondering whether I was going to force you to or not. Right? You felt that, didn't you? You were wondering, if he's going to force me, I don't know what I'm going to do there. You're saying no, but I'm saying yes. And if I wasn't respectful of your feelings, I might have forced you into coming up. Now you would have not only felt now fear, but also felt like you were controlled and manipulated and pushed around, and you'll never ask a question again. That's the way it is. And it can create actually a lot of damage if I'm not respectful of that emotion that you feel, right? And in that moment, though, if you think about it, you're not completely humble either to the experience of fear. And this is what happens to us, you see. Most of the time, during our day-to-day life, fear gets triggered through different events that we attract into our life. But because we're not completely humble to the fear, we never release it. And so we live in it. And we finish up designing our life around our fears. Do you know what I mean by that? So in other words, your life at the moment is going to definitely be designed around never getting up in front of a group of people. So your job, you'll hate any job or hate any part of the job that will require you to get up in front of a group of people. Does that make sense? You'd be very nervous about it, you'd be upset. The night before, you'd be sick in your stomach, there'd be all those different things. And all of those things are telling you that actually there's some emotion underneath that. Now that emotion can be taken back and many times traced back to what happened to us as children when we were placed in front of a group of people. And what happened to a lot of us when we were placed in front of a group of people. You get humiliated, laughed at, and a lot of these different feelings come at you, and they enter you, and they now determine the rest of your life and your choices. And what I'm suggesting to you is if you're completely humble to every emotion, you can release that from you, And if you're completely open to personal and universal truth, you can release all of those emotions from you so that you are completely comfortable in every situation that comes along into your life. Now you have the freedom, complete freedom, to be your true self, whoever that is. And if that person, that person might be a person who's passionate about plants, right? For example. And you're passionate about plants, and then you're asked to speak in front of an audience of 10,000 people about plants. Because you're passionate about plants, this event sooner or later will probably come along. And you are completely relaxed with that entire process. Because even though you're passionate about plants, you've released all the emotions related to people, and you've released all of the fears associated with being in a different environment. You are yourself in every environment, and so therefore you're never worried about what environment you're in. Yeah? Now, isn't that freedom? That's true freedom. When you're not concerned about the environment, you are now free to experience and be yourself and experience your life without having to modify or be afraid of anything. Right? And so what I'm suggesting to you is this process of humility into truth and then receiving God's love, which is the key principles of divine truth that we're teaching people, is all about breaking through these barriers, emotional barriers that we have that prevent our lives from blossoming. You see, God designed us to be the best person we can be. But through a series of events in our childhood and so forth, we became very suppressed and controlled emotionally. Right? And some countries there's more emotional control than others, or in some countries there's emotional control in different areas or in different regions than others. And as a result, each of us culturally is a little different, but generally all basically cultures on earth have some level of control. This causes us to not be our true selves, to not be humble anymore. We're not the person that we are on the inside to the outside world. Now, because we're not the person we are on the inside with the outside world, we are now unable to actually experience personal truth. In other words, when somebody tells us you've got this particular issue, or when the law of attraction brings us an event which shows us that we've got an issue with something, we're fear with something, or grief with something, we do not wish to experience it. And because we don't wish to experience it, we don't release it. And because we don't release it, we now have less freedom. You could think of it like everything we don't release, everything that we don't accept as truth, causes us just to have another bar in a prison of our own making. Now, for many of us, I can't say that it's completely of our own making, because the reality is that much of the prison got put there during our childhood through the making of other people who were involved in our lives. But as adults in particular, we have total personal ability to release any of these bars, to actually change our life. But because they are so closely associated with deep fears inside of ourselves, most of us go through our entire life without ever releasing them. And they define all of our life. They define every relationship. They define everything we do. This is why we seem to have repetitive things happening in our life. You know, I went and got a different job, but I got the same result. I went and got a different job, but I was still unappreciated in that job just as much as I was in the last one. There's something there that's telling us there's something there in the prison that we've made, or that has been made around us, that we're not releasing to address. Does that make sense? If we come down here.
One of the things that comes in for me a lot when I try and feel into things is self-judgment. That is the biggest judge. And I know after I watched Mary's talk with Sleep State 2 then what happened, that transferred into God as the big judgmental Christian thing that I was brought up with. So
yeah.
That's the two things that get into play, and self-judgment is probably the worst one in some ways. So just how to deal with that really.
Self-judgment, though, when you think about it, can only have entered you through a process. You see, you had to be taught to judge yourself. Like, you imagine a little baby just being born, laying there. Does it care that it's naked? No. Does it care that it's screaming? No. Does it care that it does anything, including crap on the pillow. No, it doesn't, does it? There is literally no self-judgment in that place. The child is completely able to be itself. Now, some of us would realise that, hang on a sec, while that's true, it hasn't got a very much developed intellect, so that it can't think about, oh, what does the crap on the pillow look like and how does it smell and all those other things that cause it to then judge. But the reality is, judgment gets introduced by the environment's emotional projection upon the child. Right? So if the child is allowed to do whatever it does throughout its life and develop, of course it's going to grow and develop and learn. But if it's allowed to discover this process itself without judgment, then it doesn't learn how to judge itself. So the only way that we can learn to judge ourselves is by somebody judging us first. Now that somebody is most often our parents. Now when I say our parents judging us, most parents go, I never judge my children. How do you say that to me? Right? Which is a denial of some personal truth, because most of us have judged our children at some point. But the reality is we have an emotional condition inside of ourselves that causes the feeling of judgment to automatically come out of us, given a certain set of circumstances. So, for example, when the child poos on the pillow, what's the emotion in most parents? Oh, that's just disgusting. Oh, it's terrible. You know, that's their feeling. But it stinks as well. Oh, now I'm going to have to clean it up. Now, there's all these emotions coming out of the parent. Where are they going? Well, they're going into the child. Besides the rest of the environment, they're going into the child. Now, of course, other people in the environment all agree, so because I've already had all those same emotions into them when they were children, right? But the little baby who is just raw and has not had this sensation of being judged before, now has an emotion, without its intellect being developed even, has an emotion of judgment entering it. Unavoidable. It's in the situation. So now the child is afraid of its own bodily functions. And you know, half of us in the audience are still afraid of our own bodily functions. Right? And this is the reason why. Because we have all this judgment coming at us right from the moment that we were born. So can you see that self-judgment has to have its inception in somebody else judging you? So the key was, and what happens when somebody else judges you is this. You learn over a period of time that the way to get away from another person's judgment of you is to judge yourself before they get to judge you. Do you understand? So if I judge myself before you judge me, and then I modify my behaviour or my facade so that it now suits your judgment of me, now I've prevented the feeling of your judgment entering me. I'm one step ahead of you. I've already judged myself. So for the majority of us who judge ourselves quite severely, what's actually happening is that we have had judgment from others, and we learned through this process of judgment from others that if I judge myself first, then the other person will not judge me. If I judge myself and modify my behaviour based on my personal judgment, the other person now cannot judge me. Yeah? And that's a great way of avoiding the emotional projection of the world that surrounds us. Can you see it's quite sad too, isn't it? Yeah. And that's why you're connecting to the sad. And that's beautiful that you're connecting to the sad, because you're having a realisation that you're only judging yourself because of others that have judged you first. Right? And that's a wonderful thing to realise in your life. Once you realise that, you will stop automatically judging yourself and going, where in my life did somebody judge this first? And why did I modify my behaviour to suit them? You see, emotional stuff, projections, if you want to call them that, coming out of another person towards yourself, of judgment, are very unpleasant to endure. Very unpleasant. Yeah. Most of us, even as adults, can't cope with them. You imagine standing in front of an audience and 100 people in the audience are swearing at you and cursing you, and you just had to stand there. Now, the majority of adults would find that situation unbearable. The majority of adults would just be reduced to tears or want to get away or get very angry in that situation, because of the amount of projection coming. That is the power of our emotional projection onto another person. It's the power to harm them greatly. You know the old saying, sticks and stones can break my bones, but names can never hurt me? Well, what do you feel more now as an adult? Was it the name calling or the sticks and stones? Isn't it the names that actually hurt you more than the sticks and stones? It's very interesting, isn't it? You know, we say that, but the reality is that it's the names that we're called which have the judgment behind them. And it's the judgment behind all of this stuff that hurts. And it's very, very powerful. And what we learn then is to circumvent that judgment of others, judge ourselves instead.
Can I make a point? You talk about personality being the false self. Obviously, do you see that as the egoic, the ego? Would you describe it in those terms? I just want to further develop my point, because how I see society in the way in which, certainly in mainstream culture, it focuses upon people's, their physical self and the personality, and what it does is it convinces them that anything else isn't themselves. So the culture convinces people that personality is you. So, and you can see how in which the manipulation comes through. What I'm trying to say is, well, I think that's kind of a deliberate thing, so we can't connect with the divine or God. To make us, culturally, we focus on, it's all about our clothes, our bodies, our look. And I think that's for a very good reason.
I agree, but I find it even more interesting where you've gone intellectually.
All right, okay.
Because what I'm stating to you is very basic and simple.
Well, I tend to kind of, when I see something, I just extrapolate it.
You're now making it very complex, is what I'm feeling.
All right, okay. But that's my brain. Great.
Well, no, it's driven by a fear and a need to define rather than experience. Now, let's look at these terms. Ego. Now, that means different things to different people. You see, in the spirit world where I came from, the ego was the true self.
Right, well, so it's the flip.
Which is the opposite of what most people on earth believe the ego to be. Does that make sense? And in fact, the original words in Greek actually refer to your true self. However, what we do is we now use the term ego as like a facade self that we've created, yes, to suit the portrayal of ourselves, or to suit others basically, to portray ourselves.
So we're all complicit in it. Cause
we are. But it depends on definition, and that's what I'm getting at. If you just feel, the definition is no longer really required. Now, let me illustrate. If I feel myself in any situation and I am truly humble to my emotional condition, right, then what will happen is when some situation occurs that makes me feel uncomfortable, I will know I'm uncomfortable. I will feel my own discomfort because I'm humble to all of my feelings. Does that make sense? Now, when I feel my own discomfort, I will then feel what I want to do to fix my discomfort. Right? In other words, going into some kind of ego-type process or some kind of facade to avoid this discomfort that I am actually feeling. And I'll feel my tendency to do that. And if I'm really self-aware, I'm really feeling all emotions, I'll go, no, I'm not going to do that. I am going to sit here instead and feel this discomfort, this feeling that I'm getting from other people that's making me uncomfortable.
Very much akin from a Gnostic principle to sort of it's where you sit with the ego. So it's called an ego analysis. It's sort of a similar kind of
now
process.
to me you're putting a term to it. Now we
but what I'm doing is I'm listening to you speak,
Yep.
and my knowledge of other things. Like before, you said about an interesting point. Okay, someone's in a job, right? They leave the job, they go to the next job, that pain in the arse occurs again. They go to the next job, that pain in the arse occurs again. If you think of it from a shamanic principle, it's only when that person traces the root of their emotional discord, whatever it is that they're projecting, once they do that, then like the universe, in a nod and a wink, then that person will leave, kind of thing. And then...
And I can't agree with you.
You can't agree with
No.
that.
You
So
see,
what I'm trying to do is, I'm not trying to...
can I just...
No, can I just say something? What I'm trying to do is, what you're saying to me is, I'm not trying to agree or not agree.
I understand.
What I'm trying to do is, I'm saying to you how I see similarities to other spiritual teachings. That's what I'm saying.
I agree. I agree.
Because
But
I don't...
can I say something to you?
Yeah, of course.
Something to bear in mind.
Yeah.
Every other spiritual teaching teaches you, so let's just read about this, that the way to resolve almost everything is through an intellectual process of discovery,
Right, okay.
which is one that you are currently, right now, in this discussion, engaging with me.
No, because I've said about, yes, you need an element of the intellect, but in order to trace the emotional root of this issue with people, with this person at work,
So how do you trace it? You tell me.
how would you trace it? Well, you could, one way of doing it would work with shamanic, you could have a
So now you're
shamanic
introducing
practice.
Right. You're introducing a practice, which I don't believe you need.
Right, no, I'm not saying you necessarily need it.
Well, well, how are you going to cure the problem?
No, but
My question is how to cure
what
the
you're
problem.
doing is, I'm making observations of your talk. That's all I'm doing. I'm not making a judgment.
Can
And
I
you're flipping it
state
into
what you're actually
You're
doing?
flipping it into a judgment. which
No, I'm not. What I'm saying to you, what you are actually doing is this. You are getting my words that I'm speaking and thinking that you've heard this before.
No, because what you're doing, the classic thing, what you're trying to, if you weren't egoic for a start, you would say, yes, this chap is saying things, and I can understand how he's mental processing it. I'm not trying to say that what you're saying is incorrect or isn't correct. All I'm trying to say is from other things I've read or from other people that I've listened to is how it overlaps. And to me, the problem with the whole mind-body-spirit field, the whole bloody, the whole,
Now I'm
the
getting
shitty
real
turds.
mood. This is really good.
Okay, because now you're going to do the whole emotional thing.
No, this is
The problem with that field is what stops people
Yeah.
even venturing into it from the mainstream is everyone wants to say, no, well, I've got the truth, but I've got this knowledge and it's mine. It's right. No, this is just the teaching. All you're doing is the teaching of the ages. That's all it is. It's just that, it's the knowledge is there for everyone, is it not?
I agree.
Right.
But let's look. It has to be God's truth, right? This is what I feel. It has to be God's truth, not men. Right? Now you can come up with an idea, and that can be your idea. I can come up with another idea, and that can be my idea. Sometimes our ideas will be similar and even overlap.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it's God's truth. It doesn't mean that it's how God created us to be.
Right. Okay.
Right? And this is what I'm saying, is that what man does is man resolves problems by coming up with practices.
Right, okay.
He goes through this process of seeing a problem, which is a very, in a lot of ways, this is something we're taught to do from a very young age, and it's almost an automatic process anyway for most of us. We see a problem, it's uncomfortable, so we want to cure it, we want to fix it. And that's understandable, is it not? Like if you have a problem and it's causing you pain and suffering and and feelings that are uncomfortable and so forth, it's almost automatic, isn't it, that you want to fix it? Yes? Okay. So what we then do is we exercise. Unfortunately, this is what we do. We exercise our intellect, and we come up with a practice that we feel fixes the problem. Right? And then we label the practice. Because I've come up with it, let's call it AJ's practice. Right? Or if somebody else comes up with it, let's call it Buddhism. Or somebody else comes up with it, let's call it shamanism. Or somebody else, and so forth. We come up with all of these different types of practices, right? But the problem is that none of them, all of them are reflective of the fact that we don't understand what God's truth is of the matter. Because all we would need And if we all connected to God in some way, we would all come up with the same practice to resolve the same problem.
So what you're saying is Buddhism, whatever you want to look at, Gnosticism, whatever you want to look at, they don't take into account God's truth. Is that what you're saying?
They are all created by men, for men, in an attempt to understand God's truth.
It's a bit of like, it's kind of like it's a bit of a mind, what's the word? A mind melt, it's a mind, because, well, they incorporate God's truth, surely.
No, they incorporate some of God's truths.
Right.
But why, if they incorporated all of God's truths, they would all be the same. Does that make sense? Like God's truth, like this is a basic principle of what I'm teaching. And by the way, this is not my teaching. Absolute truth is available. The absolute truth on everything is available. So let's talk at it from a physics perspective. The absolute truth about matter is available. It exists, so therefore it must be available for us to discover. Is that not correct? So my feelings are the absolute truth on everything is available. And I call that God's truth. Not mine, not yours, not man's investigation, not a spirit's telling man.
So the point is, though, what I was talking about before is, do you decry the fact that, say, for example, different spiritual teachings, they're not useful, they're not even useful tools to use in order to connect to God or the divine or whatever you want to call it?
The basic feeling I have is no, because sooner or later they'll stagnate at some point unless it's God's truth.
Right.
So you see, it's like they might be okay for a period of time, a short period of time. They might have some role in our life in terms of causing us to accept some of God's truth, causing us to change. And so, for example, we might go along to a Christian church for a while. And during that process, we learn that God is an entity. And not only in that process do we learn that God's an entity, we then start actually feeling God's an entity that we can actually communicate with and receive from. So that we learn something and that resonates with my soul. Right? And then I start trying to communicate with God with my emotions, and the church says, oh no, that's not how you do it. You do it by making this prayer and you do this. And then straight away things get a little bit convoluted, and now we're away from the potential. Does that make sense? Now, so then I go along to my Buddhist teacher who doesn't believe God's an entity. So most Buddhists believe that we can become God, that we are all God, that we are all aspects, if you like, of God. Now, the Christian faith believed that God is an entity. And I felt that while I was there. And then I go along to the Buddhist faith, and they believe almost the entire opposite thing, it seems, in the sense that we are all a part of God, and therefore we could even all call ourselves God.
So what you're essentially saying is, I don't need any longer to bother my intellectual self with researching and reading about different teachings.
Oh no, I'm not saying that.
Teaching.
No, I'm not saying that.
No. Okay.
I'm saying it's very important.
I was being a bit.
I know.
Yeah.
And you're a little angry too, so...
No, I'm not angry, but...
You're frustrated with me because...
No, the point is I was just making comparison about what you've said and how it chimes with other things. I don't hold to any of these other teachings necessarily.
I know you don't, and that's the irony. But to me, what I'm saying is this. I'm saying to you, don't think that by see, what I feel a lot of people do with divine truth, the truth that I'm attempting to teach people, is they think they've heard it before and they compare it with things they've heard before. And I'm not saying the same thing, even though you think I'm saying the same thing.
That's the mind screw.
Well, it's not only the mind screw. The problem with language is this. There's a problem with language. You see, it's like if I use the terminology of a previous experience in terms of my words, it's highly likely that you're going to think I'm talking about that previous experience, even if from my perspective I'm talking about something completely different, to what you think I'm speaking of. Does that not make sense?
Yeah.
And this is the problem of using language to describe spiritual concepts, is that quite often we can use the same language and yet be talking about entirely different things. And so what we need to do is have a bit more of a complete understanding of what's going on than just starting to try to accept things as in a comparative way intellectually. And that's what I want to describe to you, the process of how that happens.
Because basically I would, what am I trying to say, sorry, I need to dominate this talk.
You are, no, continue.
But you're telling me to go with something that, you know, you're telling me to go with something that I don't feel comfortable with.
And no, I'm telling you that it's okay to investigate all forms of what are potential truth. But you need to have some way of comparing it to know whether it is truth or not. There needs to be some way to do that. Does that make sense? It's like, what's the point of me, if I'm a physicist, for example, and I'm trying to discover how the atomic structure works, right? I need some kind of experimental method of determining that my theory is actually true. You can see that, right? Now let's apply the same principle to spiritual development. It's no good me accepting a whole series of potential truths or investigating a whole series of potential truths without coming to some personal resolution as to which one of these truths is actually true. So the problem is that if you look at all religions on the earth, all of them have one thing in common, and that is they were all created by a person who used their intellect generally, or sometimes a combination of their intellect and their feelings, and a lot of times with a lot of external spiritual or spirit entity influence, to come up with an idea that they believe is true. And then they try to fit the universe into that belief. And they call that truth. Now what I'm saying is the opposite.
So you're teaching a new kind of truth?
No, I'm more teaching how to discover truth, not the truth itself, because I actually believe I've not discovered the truth, the full truth. Does that make sense? So what I'm teaching is not the truth, but rather a process of how to discover truth, how to actually determine through your life what is actually true and what is not. Now to do that, we need those three things that I firstly mentioned.
The reason why I mention again these other practices and religions or spiritual practices, surely they help to remove the false self, and that's what you started with, the pretext of how can we connect to God's truth? How can we connect to God's truth if we're living through the false self, i.e. the personality? But don't these other religions and spiritual practices teach one to go beyond the ego? They teach one, so surely that helps.
Well, if you look at the results of such religions, it doesn't look like
I'm not saying I subscribe to all the shittiness with religion. I'm just saying the spiritual golden thread that runs through all these teachings surely is about disavowal of the ego, and surely is about trying to connect to God's truth.
Yeah, see, and I feel that it's all about becoming the individual, becoming the person God created you to be, which is an individual, not all the same, not. And so I feel. Sorry, we just got a problem with our whiteboard. We might have to put it up on the left, because it's actually broken. And I feel it's very, very different to what you're describing in terms of a process. What the feeling I have is that if you understand the process of discovering truth, then you can investigate anything you want, and you know how to determine what's truthful or not. Whereas if you just come up with ideas, one after the other, after the other, after the other, without ever formalising or working out how to determine what's truthful and what isn't, in other words, without actually doing the experiments, you're just coming up with ideas without experimentation, then what happens is that in the end you come up with hundreds of ideas and you still don't resolve what's true. You look at hundreds of different things and you still don't know. Now, if you look at... If you look at your lives, how many of you have done like hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of investigation of all different forms of truth? Pretty much most of you, yes. And how many of you feel completely resolved with yourself that you've now discovered the truth? Not many in comparison. Is that not true? It's everybody's goal, isn't it?
No, if you once you've got something, then there's no energy, no life left in it.
I disagree. Because the reality with truth is that it's infinite. The reality of truth, one of the qualities of truth, is that truth is infinite. So my suggestion
If
is...
truth is infinite, then how come it's only yourself that seems to think you have the ability to teach it? That's what you're suggesting, though.
I'm sorry, but you have not heard me.
No,
That's
what you're suggesting.
No, I have not
I
suggested
think there's
that.
elements of truth with all these teachings.
So now I'm not listening to what I've just said.
No, but that's what you're saying. I'm not heckling.
You are not listening to what I've
I'm trying to get to the
said.
restoration.
Because
I'm owning my frustration.
what I've just said is that I'm teaching the process of discovery of truth and not the truth itself.
Well, what is the truth itself?
Well, that if you know the process, you will discover the truth as you go along.
So
Because
it's
truth
about
is...
discovering
No,
a
listen. No,
process.
you need to listen long enough or I'm going to kick you out. You need to listen long enough to actually hear a response if you want one. All right? Now, if we are in the process of discovering truth and the truth is infinite, we will get to understand and hear new truths as we go along. Right? But what I'm saying is there is a general process that God designed that allows us to discover what is truth and what is not.
So you're talking about cosmic principles?
See, now you're going a little intellectual on me again. What I was talking about is exactly what I
in
said.
other words, sorry, I'll always go intellectual, because on the one hand, people will go, right, 9/11, right? You know, truth is, it wasn't really terrorism, it was an inside job. But on a metaphysical level, well, no, it's not about that, because you could say it's about two towers come down, it's the end of duality, Jacqueline and Boas and all the rest of it. So, you know, where does truth...
Excuse me, I'd like to hear.
Well, I'm just, it's a general discussion, isn't it?
I'm only happy to engage you one more time, in fact.
No.
No, but you're being quite rude to the rest of the audience, for a start. You are being quite rude to the rest of the audience, and that's why...
We want to listen.
But let me answer your question. I have said to you quite plainly that there is a process of determining truth. Now you're not listening, so it's pointless
I
answering.
am listening to you. I am listening to you. Carry on.
There is a process of the discovery of truth. I am telling you quite plainly that I do not know all the truth. I've said that quite plainly. But there is qualities of truth. And one of the qualities of truth is that truth is infinite, and we will discover more and more of it over time. However, there is a process to the discovery of truth. And that process is a process God has designed and mankind has rarely implemented.
And that's
or
what
discovered.
you do in your talks, is it? I'm just trying to understand intellectually what you do. That's what I'm trying to do.
No, you're trying to be argumentative
No, I'm not. I'm just
rather than discover. However, you are. However, what I've said to you is that there is a process of discovery of new truth. And when you engage that process, you will come to understand what the truth is on any subject that you apply that process to. Does that make sense? Now, that process is a process that mankind generally does not engage. So the process mankind generally engages is a process where what they finish up doing, is they come up with ideas which they then try to conform the universe to through these ideas. They sometimes merge their ideas and they notice a new thing happening in the universe, and so they try to merge that idea into their current perspective. So if you look at, say, the Christian faith, for example, and I'm not picking on the Christian faith for those of you who are Christians, but there is this idea in the Christian faith that there are certain basic truths that are, what do they call them? Unable to be disputed. They call one of those basic truths, for example, the death of Jesus is what saves me from my sins. Now, Now, if you look at the universe, and particularly you look at the earth and the people on the earth, does it look like the people who have that belief have no sin? Well, no, it doesn't. They still have error, they still have unloving behaviour, they still have anger, they still have whatever. And as a result of that, doesn't that prove that the death of Jesus didn't save them from their sin? And yet what we do is we try to conform that, and we go, and they come up with other explanations to try and conform that particular teaching, which has been, by the way, been around like 1700 or so years, and they try to conform us all to it. Now let's look at the Buddhist faith. The Buddhist faith has the idea that once you clear yourself of all desire and all passion, you become at one with the universe. And yet, if you look at a baby, when it's firstly born, it has desire straight away. It has a desire to eat, for example, and a desire to express itself. And yet, we're meant to now suppress these desires somehow in order to get to God. Now, what I'm saying is that is, again, another man's idea of how to get to God, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the truth. There is just a process or a way for us to determine the truth, and that's what I'm trying to illustrate to you as a group. There is a way or a process that you can follow to determine truth, and in that process, you'll discover that a lot of these truths that mankind has postulated or come up with intellectually as ideas, some of them are actually true. So some of the teachings in the Christian faith are actually true. And some of the teachings in the Buddhist faith are actually true. And some of the teachings in other forms of religion or faith or even daily practice are actually true. But as yet on the planet, there is no teaching that is completely true, because when you follow that particular process, you find there's every single thing you look at through this process, you find certain faults with it, certain things that are wrong. And what I'm suggesting to you is that process is going to be for the rest of your life. Not just this life, this physical life, but the rest of your existence. If you follow that process, you'll grow to discover immensely powerful truths that you would never have discovered using any other method. That's what I'm describing. Does that make sense? You okay with that? I think we've had enough time on that subject though. And there was somebody who had their hand up earlier. Oh, yes.
I just had my hand up because I wanted to just say that in very simple terms, what's been going on here, discussion-wise, it's really about not looking outside of ourselves for any of the truths, but actually the truth is within. And when we
I don't agree with that either.
See, that's I would argue with what that lady was saying, because I would definitely argue that
you are now being rude because you just interrupted the whole proceeding without putting your hand up, and I'm trying to address her question.
But you're all demonstrating groupthink anyway, group mind, because you're all picking on me. So that's.
Well, no, I'm just asking you to treat us lovingly. I'm asking you to treat us lovingly. A person's asked the question. I gave you plenty of time answering your question. Now I'd like to give my time to the lady who asked the question.
But when everyone asks a question,
now you're being rude again.
When everyone asks a question, you always say, "I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that."
Well,
how can you not agree with someone saying that?
I'm allowed to not agree with any of you.
But that's because but that's the. You know, how can you not agree with someone saying their own divine truth is their own inner truth? I mean, that's absurd.
What is your name?
My name's Anthony.
What is it?
Anthony.
Anthony.
Yeah.
You need to leave now, Anthony.
Okay.
Because you're just not being loving to the rest of the group.
It's not about being loving.
It is about, the whole thing I'm teaching is about being loving. The whole thing I'm teaching, Anthony, is about love. So this is about love. I want to answer another person's question.
Thank you.
Now, what was the question?
It wasn't really a question.
Oh, that's right. You were talking about going within.
Yeah.
The reason why I don't necessarily agree with that is because inside of us we have a lot of different types of emotions. And some of our emotions are actually what I would classify as addictions. In other words, they're emotions that are not pure or in harmony with love and truth, but rather they are addictive in their nature. In other words, we're using these emotions to satisfy some unhealed feelings within us that cause us to act unlovingly to other people. Does that make sense? Now, if I go within every single time to determine what the truth is, then sometimes I'm going to go within and I'm going to feel something's the truth when it's actually not, because it's an addiction rather than the truth. Now, I see this happening a lot in New Age circles where people say if it feels bad, then it must be wrong. I don't agree with that statement either, because there are many things that feel good that are actually, from God's perspective, out of harmony with love and truth. And there are many things that we feel are bad currently, that are bad, and yet are actually in harmony with God's love and truth. And it's because of our addictions that we believe they're meant to be out of harmony. So going within isn't always the solution either. Can I tell you what the solution is? Yes, if I find somebody unloving in a group, I'll give them a certain amount of time to address the issue of being unloving, and if they continue to be so, then I ask them to leave. I have had times where I've been tempted to almost call the police in some of our presentations, but that's a different story. Okay, so let's look at how to determine truth. Now, this involves the being that is God. God is your creator. So if you think of that person or being as your creator, that being, according to my current feelings, is male and female. You don't have to accept that. When I say male and female, it has masculine and feminine qualities. That's what I've discovered through this process. However, you don't have to believe that. Although half of us here are males and half of us here are females, it sort of makes sense, would it not? But we'll talk about that later. Here is your soul. I feel that you're a half of a soul, so I'll draw you like one half, and that's the other half of you, whoever that is. Now, if it's the male or the female, it's up to you. We together are one complete unit or entity. But you don't have to believe that. You are, at the moment, an individual. Let's call you an individual like that. Okay? How does this individual determine the truths about the universe and the truths about itself? That's the question. Because we want a way, don't we? If we don't have a way to do it, then it's pointless investigating anything, isn't it? And this is what I find fascinating with mankind on the planet. They investigate one area of spiritual investigation. It's got a lot of fascinating things in it. I like this and I like that, but I don't like this and I don't like that. And instead of determining what is actually God's truth in that, we go, I like that, so I'll accept that. I don't like that, so I'm not going to accept that. And then we go, but generally with that particular faith or whatever it is, religion or whatever, on the whole I don't like it much. So then I go and find another one. And I investigate that using the same method. I like that, I don't like that, I like this, I don't like that. And then if the likes and the dislikes, if it's disliked like that, then I'll leave that faith and go on another one. And if you think about your own lives, many of you have done this over and over and over again, where you've investigated one thing after another, after another, after another, finding flaws in things, finding things that didn't marry up, didn't sort of join together, all that stuff. And so in the end, what we start doing is we start accepting what we feel is a basic truth. And it's very much a New Age philosophy, which is everything's got truth. We start saying that to us, because that prevents us from ever actually having to make a choice about what is truth or not, because we've become frustrated with that process. Now, what I'm suggesting to you is that you don't need to do that. There is another way to determine truth, and this other way has certainty, completely certain with everything. It's a process where you'll discover truth after truth after truth for the rest of your existence. In other words, you'll always be fascinated, you'll always be enthralled with the discovery process, but you will not ever feel like confusion with regard to what is truth or what isn't once you've made the discovery. So, what is the process? The process is this, and it's a very basic underlying theory that I'm presenting to you that you can actually put into practice in your day-to-day life to discover whether I'm saying to you is true or not. And that is, if there is a God who loves you, then that love should be flowing to you 24/7, as the saying goes. If that God exists and that God loves you, that love, let's call it divine love, shall I? In order to separate it from the love of people, I'm going to call it divine love, meaning love coming from the divine, from God. That divine love should be flowing to you 24/7, if that God exists. Now, if that God doesn't exist, then this whole discussion is pointless. Does that make sense? And I'm perfectly happy to concede that. But if this God does exist, then this love should be flowing into your soul, flowing into your being, into your person, all the time, unless there's a problem with the flow of love. Now, does everyone understand that from that perspective? Very simple understanding, isn't it? Now, what is the thing that would prevent the flow of this love into this soul? And what I'm saying to you is there's only two things that can prevent it. Only two. One is like this big barrier across the top. That actually means that when this love attempts to flow into you, there's a break in it that doesn't allow the love to actually get into you. And that barrier is our inability to accept truth. Or a false belief. So in other words, while I believe the wrong thing, God's love cannot flow into me because I'm holding on to a belief of something that's in opposition to the love itself. And while I'm in opposition to the love itself, God's love cannot flow into me. Surely that makes sense from a intellectual theory perspective, at least. So that's number one. So what I'm saying is that without truth, love cannot flow. I'm even saying that without truth, love cannot flow between individuals. Like if you're with your partner and you've just cheated on your partner and you withhold the information from your partner, love can't flow. That's what I'm saying. When you do or act out of harmony with the love, out of harmony with truth in the relationship, love can't flow. That's what I'm looking forward. That's the first thing, our inability to accept truth. In other words, if we put it in a positive, what I'm saying is that this love will continue to flow as long as I accept truth. Now, straight away, can you see this is very interesting? Because what it's also telling me, if we take the opposite idea, what it's also telling me is that if I don't accept the truth, love cannot flow, and therefore I have a way of determining what is truth. So if the love isn't flowing into me right now and I can't feel it flowing into me right now, then I've got to be out of harmony with truth in that moment.
But to understand that, we would need to know what that love felt like at least once.
And that's our problem. Most of us have no idea what that love feels like until we put this experiment in place. Does that make sense? Yeah. And so the reality is most people on the planet have never or rarely experienced the flow of God's love into their soul just for that one reason. They have always been blocked to truth, and so nothing actually flows as a result into them. No love can flow. And because they've never had the experience of love flowing, they then start going down the track of maybe there isn't a God. Maybe there isn't anything like love. Maybe I've got to come up with my own ideas of what God is. Maybe, they worry about all those other things because they're just not feeling the love. Does that make sense? Yep. So I agree, unless you have that very first experience, it's very, very hard. The key is to at least get to the point of having that one experience and then to analyse what happened for you to have that experience. Yeah, I agree.
Please could you tell me, for you, how you're differentiating between truth and humility?
Truth is the truth whether I accept it or not. Let me illustrate. This is a blue pen, yes? We both agree? Okay. Why do we both agree?
We can both see it.
We can both see it. It has a colour to it that we all agree is called blue. Yeah. Now, many people will argue, and perhaps the man who was previously in the audience might argue that it's black or something like that, this colour. But those colours are very different from each other, are they not? Yeah? One is truthfully a different colour than the other, is it not? The truth is that one is a different colour than the other. They're not the same. That is a basic truth. I would call that the truth whether you accept it or not. Does that make sense? That is a different colour than the other, and that is a truth that both of us can either deny completely. We can argue that it's not. We can even intellectualise the whole process. Well, this is made of atoms, and this is made, and this, and in the end, it's not really that colour anyway. It's just the way our eyes perceive it. And once I've explained all of that, then it's not blue. And in the end, none of that proves anything because in the end, these two are different colours. That is a basic truth. Now, what I'm saying to you is that basic truths exist in all walks of life. So in other words, basic truths about physical things exist, such as science, physics, and those kind of things. Basic truths exist. But I'm also saying that basic truths exist about your emotional self. And basic truths exist about the universe. And basic truths exist about your spiritual self, about who you really are, that soul. That's what I'm suggesting. I'm not going to tell you what those basic truths are. I'm just suggesting that those truths exist as absolute truth. Does it make sense? That you can discover for yourself. That you do not need anybody else to tell you even if you follow this process. You can discover them, and in the end, you will discover the same things that I have discovered or will discover. Because eventually, if we all discover the absolute truth, we'll eventually end up with the same belief about the truth. So if I can illustrate that, all of the scientists who began investigating the atom started off with different concepts of what it was. However, over the years, what happened? Their concepts converged as they discovered more truth. Do you see that? Let's look at flight. Initially, we had all these different ideas about what flight would be, the laws involving aerodynamics. But over the years, all of those concepts converged into one law even. The law of aerodynamic and lift. The law of aerodynamics is a law that is a truth because we have relied on it over and over again, and everybody, even though they started off with different ideas, because they were the scientists who did this, were open to different truths. And because they were open to different truths, they eventually discovered the one truth they were seeking. Does everyone get that principle? It's the same spiritually, exactly the same spiritually. If we have the same process that those scientists followed, which is they were humble to receive new information. They investigated truth through a process of experiment and investigation through experimentation. And they eventually proved through something happening, an event, that it was true. That's how they discovered it. And I'm saying it's exactly the same with all of the truths of the universe. God has put this whole thing in place that scientists generally understand pretty well, but the majority of us don't apply to the rest of our lives. And that process is this process. that if there is a God of love, that love would be flowing into us 24/7 as long as two conditions were present. The first condition is that I am willing to accept the truth. That's number one condition. Now that truth that I'm willing to accept can be internal or external. In other words, it can be the truth about the universe or the truth about myself. I'm not going to differentiate between those two truths. It has to be, we have to be in harmony with that truth. Does that make sense? The second condition, what do you reckon it is? This soul has to be humble. It has to be willing to experience everything it feels. Because if it's not, there are going to be some feelings coming in that it doesn't like. And if it's not willing to experience them, it's going to stop the process. It's going to harden itself to the acceptance of the truth. Does everyone get that? Yeah? So, if I am humble, I have a passionate desire to feel and experience my own emotion, and I am willing to accept the truth, and I am willing to see that this love would be flowing into me 24/7 if those two things were constantly with me. And then I sit down and I go, yeah, I've not felt God's love my entire life. I don't have a feeling that I've ever accepted God's love my entire life. Let's say I have that feeling. Then that tells me that I'm either not humble or there are a heap of truths that I think are true that are actually false. Just simply those two things. And if I want to, I can find out what they are by a very simple process. And the process would be ask this God to receive the love and then feel about that particular thing. And if that particular thing turns off the flow, I know it's not true. And if that particular thing stays flowing, then I know it's true. If the love keeps flowing, I know it's true. If I'm asking for the love to enter me, and the love keeps flowing, while I think about a particular thing, then that particular thing must also be true. That's what I'm suggesting to you. It's very simple, isn't it? Yeah?
If we haven't felt God's love, how can we, like I'm just thinking, if I ask God, to receive God's love and then thought about something, if I hadn't ever felt it before, I wouldn't be able to receive it for a test scenario because I'd have to be in a completely humble state.
Well, let me put forward another idea. If this God loves you, surely that God would be willing to go through a test scenario.
What about a spirit pretending to give you divine love?
Well, that could also be true. But then what I could do is I could receive that love and then think about something that I know for certain is harmonious with that love. In the past it's proven to me. And if it turns off, then I know this person I'm connecting to is not the God that I'm thinking. It's a way to actually work out a lot of things when you think about it. Now, it's only a theory until you put it into practice. But what I'm saying to you is if you put it into practice, you'll find that not only is it a theory, but it's actually a fact. This God has so much love for you, her creation, that she's not only installed this very simple way for you to discover the truth, but she's also willing to do test scenarios with you just to prove it. As surely you would be if you had a child of your own and you were attempting to teach that child, surely you'd be willing to have a test scenario with that child to prove something, would you not? And why would God not be better than you, more loving than you? So of course that God would have the same ability. So we could actually go through a test scenario. You could do it tonight when you go home. You could go, I've never felt this divine love that AJ's talking about. I don't think I have anyway. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a test scenario and feel a longing for that love to enter me. Now, Now, in the first century, I called that prayer. But it's up to you what you call it. That's what I call prayer. So what is what I call prayer? It's a longing. It has to come from your feelings, not a thought. It's a longing, a feeling that you would love to have God's love enter you. If there is a God, you would love to have God's love enter you. So that you can feel it. Does that make sense? Just very simple. Now, it's so simple, the majority of people think, that's far too simple. I like the complicated explanation, you know? Yeah. So Anthony loves the complicated explanation, not the simplicity. But what I'm suggesting to you is it's far more simple than that. And surely that also makes sense. If this God exists, it must be loving. And if it's loving, then surely it would create a simple process for you to discover truth. Not a complicated one, a simple one. Something that a little child, 2, 3 years of age, even younger perhaps, could actually do and go through a process of. Surely that God who loves would create such a process. And what I'm suggesting to you is that this is the process that you just need to experiment with and determine whether it's true or not.
I absolutely agree with what you're saying. I get it all. My experience of it is that it comes from within. So
if it's coming from within, then it's not God.
But I feel it as that I am inside of me, beyond all the layers of crap. There is a seed. And this seed is in every single human being on the planet. And it is the seed of God. And this seed to me has all the truths that I am ever needing to have the answers to.
And I don't agree.
Can
I state why?
But can I just finish what I'm about to say?
I've heard the explanation many times before, as you can imagine. When I go from around the world teaching, and I have done for 9 years or so, many people have said exactly the same thing to me. And the reason why I don't agree is because I do believe there is a seed inside of us, but not the seed you're speaking of. The seed I feel is inside of us is a longing for truth and for God, not the actual truth or God. The reason why it's not actually the truth of God is for if I had inside of myself all the knowledge of the universe already, which is one of the fundamental teachings of New Age philosophy, which I can't agree with, then I would already be exactly as God created me to be. But I am not. And you are not either. Right? The reality is, if I allow myself to understand that truth is infinite, it then has to be discovered rather than already inside me.
But the process that I experience is that by discovering that this seed is within, and then being able to access it whenever I need to. And it's the infinite, most explosive sensation of love that I feel. And when you're describing what is happening with this flow of love coming in, I feel it from within coming out. I feel exactly what you're saying, but I feel it from here coming out.
No, you see, this is where most people get confused, I feel. There are two types of love. Here's your soul, and here's God. There are two types of love. There is the type of love that comes out of you, which is the type of love I call natural love, or the love of humans, human love. It applies whether you're alive on the earth or in the spirit world, you still have it. Right? And every single person has it to varying degrees, based on what kind of condition they're in. So some people have had very harsh and hard lives, and as a result they have very little love coming out of them, and they have a lot of fear. Other people have less harsh life, or they've developed their love, this natural love, and this love that's coming out of them is a lot stronger. But it's still the love coming from their soul, from within them. And that's not what I'm speaking of. I'm speaking of a different love. a love that actually comes from God and enters your soul, which is a very different process. Now, New Age people, when I talk to them, think I'm talking about the same thing, and I am not. I'm talking about two completely different things. One is the love that comes from an entity called God and enters your soul. The other is the love that's within you that comes out of you from your soul. One is a unique part of you, the other is a unique part of God that can enter you. Very, very different from each other. And yet, the spirit with you, there's some spirits with you, and they do not believe in this second love. They believe that this is this. And in fact, most people I've met on earth on the New Age path believe this is this. They believe they're one and the same thing. But what I'm saying is that no, they're not. They are two completely separate things. Two completely separate loves. No matter how powerfully you experience the love coming out of your soul, that is not the same as God's love entering your soul. There's a completely different process, completely different experience.
Would the natural love, if that's fully developed within the soul that we carry,
Yep.
would that facilitate a swifter or easier way of feeling the God?
It can do, right? So usually what we find is that people who have a little more development in natural love find it easier to receive love. And so therefore, often do find it easier to receive God's love. The problem with the planet, again, is that we have all of this soul, us, this person, this being here, has a lot of preconceived notions and ideas about what it believes truth to be. So the issue is really more an issue of what is truth. You see, as I've said through the previous experiment, that we need to be in harmony with truth of God to receive God's love into our soul. That's what I've stated. To do that, we have to be in harmony with the truth of God, not our own truth. Now, to give love to others, all I have to be is in harmony with my own truth. Does everyone see that? I need to truthfully feel a feeling of love for you, and when I truthfully feel it, then you will feel it, because I'm feeling my own love and it's coming out of me towards yourself. That's a different condition than actually being in harmony with God's truth. And often our own truth is completely different to God's truth. In other words, we have concepts and beliefs within inside of us that are completely disharmonious with God's knowledge and of the universe and God's knowledge of ourselves. Completely different. Now, what I'm suggesting to you is for us to receive God's love, which is a totally different experience than having the love come out of us. To receive God's love, we have to be in harmony with God's truth, not our own. That's where it's hard. Right? For the majority of us, that's where it's difficult. Because we love our own truth. We love knowing what we think we know. We love being what we think is right. But quite often, from God's perspective, that can be completely in error. Right? So, for example, I'll just give you a few examples. Fear dominates our society and thinking. As a result, fear often dominates our own lives. Now, that fear comes out in lots of different ways. For example, when we have a newborn child, most parents have quite a lot of fear. Can you remember when you first had your first child? Can you remember that? And any of you newly done that? Emma? Yeah. So a few of you, yeah? You had a lot of fear, right? The very first child, there's a lot of fear about, what do I do? How do I act? What am I meant to do here? How do I look after this child? How do I pick it up? There's all these fears. Now, these fears all come from beliefs inside of us. They all come from beliefs that are out of harmony with God's truth. So in other words, one belief that we have is this, that when we're dead, we're dead. Now that's a very common belief on this planet, isn't it? That when you're dead, you're dead. There's no existence after death. Now because of that one fear, wars are fought. Can you see how? They're fought because we feel when somebody takes something away from us, we have to fight to the death in order to get it back, because we only have this one life. Now, if you believe that you were fine and you lived forever, why would you worry about somebody taking something away from you? You would never worry, would you? Because you know you live forever. Even if your body perishes, you know that you still exist, if you really know it. But the majority of us don't really know it. The majority of us is just an idea. And that idea is often confronted as soon as we get into a war. The majority of us then will be willing to go to war, right, for a certain ideal, when that ideal makes no sense if all of us live forever. And so we often are actually acting in complete disharmony with what we ourselves say we believe because of an emotion that we have or another belief. And what I'm saying is that to actually have God's love entering this soul, this truth has to be God's truth, not our own belief. It has to be what God states or feels is true, not what we state or feel is true. And that's the trouble, is that most of us are very resistive to discovering what somebody else, including God, says is true. Most of us are completely happy with what we believe is true, until somebody comes along and proves us otherwise. We often will fight for what we believe is true. In fact, historically, you think of the majority of wars, what have they been caused by? Two people having different beliefs and their willingness to fight to the death to try and impose that belief on the other person. Now, obviously that's not God's truth. If a person's willing to do that, you'd have to start questioning whether they actually believe the truth. Yeah.
Is natural love like a part of divine love, or is it parallel?
It's not a part of divine love at all, because remember, it's from two different sources. Natural love, or you could call it human love, or whatever you wish to call it, comes from within yourself, inside of you.
But who created natural love?
Oh, of course, if you trace it all back, then obviously, yes, at some point somebody placed that ability to love inside of us. By the way, it's only an ability, not necessarily a developed ability. Because there are many people who are totally unloving, have very little love inside of their souls, right? Very little love comes out of them. And so they've, you could say to a degree, lost the ability to love. You can gain the ability to love, if it's natural love, and you can lose the ability to love.
Absolutely.
Not absolutely, but because there's always this seed potential that God placed there for us to love. But you can lose a lot of the ability to love. I've talked to many spirits in the spirit world who've almost completely lost their ability to love. Obviously not completely, because you can talk to them at least and actually reason with them about love. But I've talked to many of them who actually believe there is no such thing as love in them or outside of them. That's what they believe. They're in places that you would call the hells or something like that, in a lot of darkness. They've all lived on earth at some point, but they feel they've lost the ability to love. But that's not true. You can't completely lose the ability to love, but you can do a lot of things on this earth that cause you to become very unloving, and therefore have like a hardened shell around you about love. Yeah? Now, the natural love comes from within you. And yes, God placed the ability for you to have this natural love and the ability for you to develop it inside of you. But that's not what I'm speaking of when I'm talking about divine love. Divine love is love that belongs to God, that comes from within God's entity, within God's soul. And
What's the basic function for natural love? Why did God place not only God's love, but
Yep, good question. The basic function of natural love is so that if you don't want God, which is your choice, you're allowed to make that choice, you still have the ability to enjoy love. That's the basic function of natural love. So even if you do not want to connect to God, you do not want to connect to your Creator, you do not want to receive divine love, The way God's created it is that you still have the ability to enjoy love, but just the love coming out of yourself or out of others towards yourself. Yeah, and that's why God created. You see, God gave us the free will to choose whether we're going to receive this love or not. But we don't actually have free will about natural love. It is something God implanted in us, and we have the free will to develop it or not. They're very, very different forms of love. And with natural love, we have the free will to develop it, but the seed of it is always present. So there's quite a lot of dark spirits with us in the room at the moment as well. Many of them come to listen to these kinds of conversations. And if they understand that none of them have ever lost this basic seed of the ability to love, even though they believe they have because they feel quite hard and harsh, then they can understand that they have the ability to grow it. But this natural love is not the love that I'm speaking of. The love that I'm speaking of is the divine love entering the soul, coming from God, not from out of yourself. Yeah. So let's go up the back there, pink. Yeah, you.
How do you know when you're receiving God's love or experiencing the natural love?
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? Obviously, there's got to be something to do with intensity and something happening. Now, what I find is that most people who experience natural love feel this overwhelming, powerful, emotional experience, and particularly have a lot of joy in the experience. When people first receive divine love, most of the time they're bawling their eyes out when they receive it, the very first time. Right? And the reason why is that it's so different in its nature that it feels so overwhelming that we can do nothing else but have a huge emotional, grieving-based experience about the loss of it. And that is one of the first experiences that most people have when they start receiving it. Now, over time, of course, that changes because we have less and less error within us, and therefore there's less and less feelings within us of, what you'd say, of confrontation of other darker emotions. However, every time a person receives divine love, they will always be overwhelmed. Every single time. Now, when you receive divine love 24/7, which is possible, and I call that at one with God, in the first century I call that being born again or becoming at one with God. Right? When you become that state, you are overwhelmed by God's love all the time. Now, for the majority of us, we even contemplate that. We go, whoa, that's like... I definitely don't even know whether I want to do that, let alone actually experience it in our lives. But we will get to the point where we have become so in harmony with God's truth that God's love can flow into us all the time, rather than it being a hit and miss affair. When I say a hit and miss affair, rather than it being like, I feel a longing for God's love now, and it enters me a little, and then all of a sudden it confronts some kind of lack of humility or lack of truth within me, and then all of a sudden it stops, because I've now stopped it. And now I have to work through my lack of humility or my lack of desire for truth, and once I work through that, it starts again. Now, if it takes me 3 months to work through it, that's 3 months without feeling the same feeling again. If it's a year, it's a year without feeling the same feeling again. For some people, it's the rest of their life. They never do it again. So I've met many people who are on the born-again movements of Christianity who have actually had the experience of God's love flowing into them, and then they've never had that experience any other time in their life. And they called it being born again, and the way they view it is that it shouldn't happen all the time, it should only happen the one time. Does that make sense? That's the explanation they provide for themselves as to why it's not happening all the time. And what I'm saying is that it will happen all the time once we address the issues of humility and truth. It will happen all the time. Now, initially, we might have that initial experiment where we think, oh yeah, I'm feeling a bit different. Yeah, I feel that this might be it, And we sort of experiment with that a bit. And then we decide, yes, I'm going to try this a bit more strongly in my life, with a bit more passion in my life, and so I do that. and I have my first overwhelming experience as a result. And for many people, it freaks them out so much, they never desire to have another one. Because in that first overwhelming experience, they're crying, they're all this emotions coming out of them, they're feeling overwhelmed, and it's just like they don't know how to talk about it. And the reality is you can't even describe it. So they don't even know how to describe it or talk about it. It's so overwhelming that it just freaks the hell out of them. And so they don't go for it again. Right? Or for many, they have that first emotional experience and they go, okay, the last time to have that experience, I set up my candles, and I knelt down, and I did this, and I did that, and I did this, and I did that. And when I did all of those things, I had the experience. So you know what they try again? Doing all the same things, hoping to create the same experience. Right? And then they start realising that maybe none of those things actually mattered, right, with that experience. But sometimes they never realise that. For the rest of their lives, they don't actually realise that what they physically created around them didn't actually create the experience. It was actually a feeling in them that created the experience. And some of them don't tweak to that, right, for a long time. So they have the experience once, and they don't fully understand why the experience occurred. And then what they do is they try to recreate the experience, because it's a lovely experience, assuming that you love crying and a fair bit of other things happening to you all at the same time, and they try to recreate that experience, but they can't. So then they either give up or they think, oh no, what happened there? And a lot of people relate to me when I meet with them and talk with them, you know that experience you're talking about? I had that in 1976. Right? I go, right, that's awesome, you know. Has it happened since? No. What happened? And they go, well, I tried to create it again, and what I did was this and that and this and that, and that, but it didn't work, and I did this and that, and that didn't work, and I did... And after a while, I just got, I don't know how it happened. So I gave up trying to have it happen again. I also meet quite a few people who have had it happen 2 or 3 times in a row, and then they have the same feeling coming out of them, desire for God's love to enter them, and the same longing, they feel the same longing and everything, and yet it doesn't happen. And that's where we've got to talk about humility and truth. Because it's always whether we're humble to our emotional experience or truthful as to whether the experience can continue. Does everyone get what I'm saying about that? Yeah? So what I'm trying to illustrate here is this is a way also of determining the truth. You see, while I'm feeling divine love flow into my soul, I know that I'm also in that particular moment in a state of truth. Internal and external is in harmony. I'm in a state of truth. Now, personally, I have not had God's love flow into my soul like that for over a year now. So what does that tell me?
Not humble enough.
I'm not humble enough about something, and I've got something that I'm in disharmony with truth about. So what do you think I've been doing for the last year?
Reflecting.
I'm trying to work out why I'm resistive to being more humble. What I've come up against is a lot of fears that I didn't even know were there. I thought I was over a lot of fears, and a whole new set of fears have come up as a result. Does that make sense? And then as I release the different fears, sometimes I just get a little trickle of it, but it's not a really huge experience yet, because I'm yet to get to the grief that's really holding it all back. Right? And there's obviously some truth I'm not accepting. Can you see that? Because if there was some truth, if I was accepting the truth and I was humble at any one point in time, I wouldn't be having the experience. And what I've learned through my life is that you can continually have the experience. You can get to the point of continually having experience constantly. Right? But it requires going through these processes of discovering truth and becoming even more humble than you thought you had to be. That's what it requires. Any other questions? So this is what I would call the divine truth basics. Yeah? The basic principle, or the basic, if you like, you can call it a theory. A theory of how God works and how we can discover truth. Can you see that I can measure whether I'm in truth or not? So I know for the last year that with these specific things that I've got a problem with, I know I'm not in truth, because I have not felt that love flowing for that period of time while I've been trying to access these particular fears. When I hit, in the past, my past experience has been, when I hit the fear and feel it completely, and then I hit the underlying grief that the fear covered, and feel that completely, as I'm feeling it, this love starts flowing again. And for me, I go, oh, I'm glad that year is over. And I'm glad that I've at least discovered another truth inside of myself.
When you said, I want to maybe you to elaborate a little bit more about willing to accept the truth. Because to me, the truth is in my soul. If I go to my soul, and anything I will feel if it's true, and my mind cannot interfere.
And that's really what you were saying as well, that the truth is within you. And I'm saying that that is actually not the case with divine truth. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying that the divine truth can only enter you, it's not already in you. That's what I'm saying. But you do have personal truth inside of you that can resonate with it. There are things that can resonate with it. You see, our soul is created in such a way that we can resonate with all sorts of things. So if we were in a prison at the moment and we were talking to a group of murderers, so rather than yourselves, we were speaking to a group of murderers, and I don't know if they'd be resonating very much with this discussion. Particularly if they were not sorry for what they'd done and they were not feeling any remorse for their act that they have taken to harm another person's life, they would actually have a completely different emotional experience, or a completely different resonance, emotional resonance, to what's being said. And this is the problem with the within I concept or idea. My soul, anybody's soul, whoever's it is, male or female, doesn't matter, has things within it that is definitely out of harmony with God's truth. But when things enter it from the externals and resonate with that, it will feel like that thing is actually truth, when the reality is that it's error. And this is the problem we face. The problem we face is that we can often think something is true and actually feel in our heart that it's true when it's not true. And the only way we can determine the difference is whether we're receiving divine love while we're thinking about those particular things. Then we will know for certain whether it's true or not. The problem with the concept, the New Age concept, that if I go within, I will discover all truth, is that it assumes that what is within is in harmony with all truth. And that is not a valid assumption. Because a lot of things have entered us from the moment we were conceived that have been out of harmony with truth. Right? And because of a lot of those things being received into our soul, it modified the resonance of our soul so that when things come to us, we think they're true when they're not. Now, I can give some examples if you want. Many of us here think that it's perfectly okay to have a spirit overcloak you and influence your life as long as that influence is benevolent. In other words, that influence has a good effect on your body or something like that. There are many people here who believe what I've just said as true. I do not believe it's true. But how do we find out whether it's true? The key is whether you do one of them and receive divine love or not. That's how you find out whether it's true. You see, what I'm suggesting is that a person who's overcloaked by a spirit with most of their day-to-day activity is incapable of receiving love from anyone other than the spirit or other spirits, because they are not being their true self. And remember, humility was all about being your true self, and truth was all about accepting external and internal truth, which is about being your true self. And I'm saying is if a person is not their true self and is being overcloaked by another person, they're not their true self, so therefore they can't be receiving divine love in that place. They've got to be receiving love from a different source. And it might be another spirit. It can even be a person who is in spirit, who's in a better condition than you, so it feels very, very loving. But it's still not what I'm speaking of. It's still not divine love, and you're still not in a condition of truth. If you stay in that place, you will not grow exponentially. You will not come to be at one with God. Because to become at one with God, it has to be you that becomes at one with God. No one with you can manufacture that. Only you can do it. There is no mediator and no helper for you to do it. You have to engage the process if you want it, if you desire it. So this whole concept that the truth is within me, and all I need to do is feel whether the thing coming at me is truth or not, while it has certain, what I would call attractive parts to it as a concept, I do not feel that it is true, because it actually allows us to believe that everything inside of us has to be true when that is not the case. Because there are many errors that have entered us over the period of our life. Can I report to you that there is actual physical evidence of what I'm saying? You see, if a person was at one with God, and a person was receiving divine love 24/7, would their physical body actually die from old age? No. Certainly not. Because the physical body has the means to completely replicate itself and recover itself, and yet that process, for some reason, scientists don't understand even why it stops, but it does stop. Now, I'm suggesting if you're at one with God, that process wouldn't stop. In other words, you could be on earth and you will look 25 even when you're 100. Now, is there anybody on earth currently who looks 25 when they're 100?
Trouble is, when you get older, your eyesight goes.
Well, if I was at one with God, would it?
No, I meant looking.
Oh, you mean what's coming at you? You think they look young, but you actually look at them. They sort of have like booze eyesight. When you're drunk, things change. Yeah. The reality I feel is that if anybody on earth currently was at one with God, they would be 25 years old and they would not age any further than that, around about. And they could be 100, 200 years old and they could still look 25. The only way they could die is if their life was terminated by some other person. That's the only way they could die. Right? Now, do you see or have you noticed anybody in that condition at this point? Right? So at this point, it appears there's no one at one with God on earth. There's no one who's receiving divine love 24/7 on earth right at this point.
Cliff Richard looks pretty good.
I haven't seen him lately. Is it Botox though? I mean without augmentation.
The main thing we have control over is our humility.
Yes, our humility is the big thing we have control over.
What I have a difficulty in practical terms, like you said, if I meet you and I go like, hello, which is true, and then adding, I find you attractive, that's truth, but I'm not sure I would want to share with everybody how I feel.
Yeah.
When he was talking, I don't know if I went into a facade, but certainly if I had just listened to how I was feeling, I would have intervened because I was conflicted inside. I didn't come here to...
Well, most of you, when Anthony was talking, felt conflicted because you felt I was allowing him to get away with too much. But my feelings are I love to be patient with a person until they display that they're just not going to change.
Wasn't Anthony like a good option for us, the Protestant people?
Oh, yeah.
Of course, of course.
If we would let him stay. And
The trouble with letting him stay is I'm not being loving to the rest of you by letting him stay. So at some point, I've got to make the decision as to what's loving for the collective group compared to what's loving for the individual. And it's actually not loving for the individual to allow him to continue doing what he was doing. Because can you see I've confronted him more now with the unloving behaviour by asking him to leave than I would have by allowing him to stay. Can you see that? So a person who's in harmony with love will not automatically allow another person to consistently display unlovingness towards them without taking some form of action and also feeling about, if I'm humble, I'll also feel about it.
But the humility is feeling, not necessarily sharing with him or a person you meet to find
I agree completely.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree completely. And in fact, my suggestion is, when you feel, so you walk up to somebody and then, like some of you may do this still, I don't know, you walk up to somebody and you feel sexually attracted to them when you meet them. Now, obviously, if you've got a partner, something's wrong. There's a sharing of sexual energy now outside of the relationship, even if it's just a feeling. It's a sharing of sexual energy. In the first century, I called that even a man who looks at another woman has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So it was a feeling coming out of him that causes that, right? Now the feeling is the thing we need to notice ourselves. Does that make sense? We need to notice the feeling inside of ourselves at least. The problem for the majority of us is we don't even notice the feeling, or we just accept it, or we feel ashamed of it, and so therefore try to detune from it. So we go, oh, I'm a bit attracted, oh, this is what, oh, my partner's there, oh, well, inside of us we're just getting now so confused that we don't allow ourselves to actually go into it and discover why this particular thing existed that seemed to be out of harmony with love with a partner that we have or whatever. And this is where I feel many of us do go astray, is that we get so ashamed about the feelings we have, or self-attacking, self-judgmental about the feelings that we have, that we don't allow ourselves to go into the feeling to actually discover what its true cause was. And so what we do instead is we go, oh, that's scary, oh, I can't handle that. And so we basically hold on to the feeling that was the true cause, because we don't want to discover it. So what happens in our next interaction? Unfortunately, exactly the same thing. And our next interaction, exactly the same thing. We don't change. And the only way we are going to change is by actually becoming more self-reflective and allowing the feelings to be present, even though they are completely uncomfortable. Does that make sense? And even though we have this feeling, if you like, that something is wrong, something's off, we need to still allow ourselves to accept the feeling and go through the experience, because otherwise we will not find the underlying cause of why something happened. Now we're starting to get into some nitty-gritties though about how to handle feelings, which is different to the basic principles that I'm talking about. There's obviously more in terms of what do we do with these feelings, how do we release the feelings that are inside of us, that are out of harmony with love, and those kind of things. You know, for example, many of us have fears.
Nature.
Sorry?
Like nature.
And
like man is attracted to woman, woman is attracted to man.
I agree. Can you put your hand up if you're going to ask?
Oh, sorry, yeah.
And I agree. We have natural feelings towards other people, but what I'm suggesting is that if we are truly in harmony with God and truth, we will only ever be attracted to the other half of ourselves, which is our soulmate. It's our soulmate. So the reality is, if I'm attracted to somebody else other than my soulmate, then there must be something out of harmony with love or truth or humility going on inside of myself that I need to allow myself to discover. Okay. Well, I think it's time probably for a break. Should we have a break for half an hour? And then we can continue this discussion for anyone who wants to continue it.